Greetings, followers. It is I, Cardinal Sin, and welcome to another episode of I Am Not a Number. And today we have with us Tracy Tormé and Rick Davy. How are you, gentlemen?
Hey, very well,
Very
Cardinal.
well. How you doing, Gil?
Good to see you both.
Thank you.
I'm sure that the good captain will be joining us, but before that, I would like to plug some merch. So I'm going to share this. This is on gillstore.com, where you can grab your I Am Not a Number t-shirt. You can grab a mug, and all kinds of other nifty stuff. We have a white one if you don't like the black one, and it's all priced with very little profit, just because people are going to be helping us get the word out about the show. So you can go to gillstore.com and grab yourself some pretty cool merch. And let's see who we have here. We have Darius Munchausen. Hail. Roger Flake is here. Hail. And let's go ahead and jump on in. Captain Cockney Spock will be on his way. And before we get started, I wanted to share something that came in the mail today. This is The Prisoner, The Essential Guide by Rick Davy.
Thank you.
And I haven't read the whole book, but I did skim it, and it looks like a lot of fun. I recommend it to everybody.
Congratulations, Rick, on the book.
Yeah, very nice.
Very kind.
And
Very kind.
inside came this wonderful little card about his website, the Unmutual website. My light is kind of blowing out the ability to see it, but lots of fun.
Mm-hmm.
And Matthew Pounder is here. Hail. Bloody microphone. As the episode begins in the Schizoid Man, number 6 is assisting number 24, known as Allison, a telepathic young woman, in practicing mind reading with Zener cards. In an extremely complex plot of bluff and double bluff, number 2 brings a look-alike of number 6, referred to as number 12, to the village. Number 12, also played by McGoohan, apart from a few shots with a double, is not a clone, but an agent of the village who happens to bear a very strong resemblance to number 6. The real number 6 is subjected to an intensive course of aversion therapy, altering his tastes and instincts, and training him to do everything left-handed. He is drugged to wipe his memory of the treatment. When he awakes, he is treated as number 12, while the look-alike assumes the role of number 6. The real number 6 is informed by number 2 of the plan to break number 6, the imposter, by convincing him that he is not number 6 at all. 6 and 12 engage in various challenges to prove which is the real number 6. The aversion therapy allows the imposter to behave more like number 6 than the real one does. In the presence of number 2 and number 6, number 12 is challenged to demonstrate that his fingerprints are number 6's, and they are. He also has his characteristic left wrist mole, which number 6 has lost. Finally, number 24 is summoned because she supposedly has a unique mental bond with the real number 6, but they fail a test with the Zener cards. Just as he appears to be breaking, the real number 6 mentally overcomes his brainwashing when he discovers a bruise on his fingernail that he got when number 24 tried to take his picture, a bruise that has migrated from the base of his fingernail to midway, confirming that days or weeks have passed, not the single day shown on his calendar. He then gives himself an electric shock to reverse the therapy. He also physically overcomes the imposter, who reveals his name as Curtis. After being forced to reveal his password and remove the fake mole from his wrist, Curtis escapes and is then mistakenly killed by Rover. Pretending to be number 6, Curtis, number 6 reports to number 2 that number 6 is dead. Rover got him. Having failed, he is to return to report his failure. He is put blindfolded onto the helicopter to leave the village. He believes himself to have duped number 2 into letting him escape, but the helicopter promptly returns to the village. Number 2 reveals that he deduced the truth when number 6 agreed to give his regards to number 12's wife, Susan, who died a year previous. I found once during this episode, I became confused as to which was number 6 and which was number 12, and I was paying attention. Did anybody else have that not quite sure who was who situation?
I think my wife felt that way. She'd never seen the episode before. And yeah, there was a period of time where she was baffled by it too. But I think that's intentional. I mean, that's sort of a mind game that if it's working correctly, you should be kind of confused by it. Does that make sense?
Rick, can you remember back to the first time you saw this episode and whether you were faked out by it?
Do you know what? I do remember. I remember the first time I watched all the episodes because I was obviously struck by each of them. I wasn't confused because obviously the giveaway is that the fake one is always wearing the white blazer, and number 6 is the real number 6 is always wearing the dark coloured blazer. So as long as you kind of remember that as you go through, at the end, if you do look away, because obviously he then impersonates the other one, I can see why someone would get confused. So it's easily done. Mm-hmm. It's not something that I get confused about. But that's the great thing about any sort of doppelganger type episode. It's kind of a quite common science fiction idea, isn't it, to have the kind of doppelganger episode. I know Star Trek and lots of other series have done it as well. But I think it's done really well in this. I really like the Schizoid Man. It's
I was very impressed. Darius Munchausen is here welcoming various folks. Welcome, Canadian Spider-Man. And Matthew Pounder says King Crimson's 21st Century Schizoid Man, 1969, must have been named after this.
It was.
Very interesting. So, I noticed, Rick, that many people think of this episode as number 8. Do you feel that this is where it belongs in the proper viewing order?
Yeah, I think somewhere in the middle. It's not an early episode because number 6 is clearly not new to the village. He kind of knows his way around. He's made a friend. It's not one of the early ones where he's kind of a bit confused as to what's going on. it has to come before the episode, the general, in my view, because at the end of the episode, the general is mentioned in the car journey, and number 6 clearly doesn't know who the general is because he almost gets caught out at that point. And it's at that point that number 2's suspicions are first arisen, aren't they?
So the general would have to come before the Schizoid Man.
No, the other way round, because obviously by the time the general comes along, number 6 knows who the general is. Whereas in this episode, he doesn't know who the general is. So
that's interesting that you mentioned that, because in my notes, I mentioned that it's worth noting the episode makes a brief reference to the general as a figure. It occurs that if we'd changed up the viewing order, it might have made this seem like a sarcastic remark.
Maybe, but I think it's clear that number 6 doesn't know who the general is, because number 6 says we won't know until we've reported to the general, and number 2 says it's a funny way of putting it. What do you mean reporting to the general? And he goes, well,
right.
I can report to him personally, you know what I mean, and tries to get himself out of it. I think it's clear he doesn't know who the general is, and he nearly slips up at that point because he doesn't know who the general is.
So far we've had an admiral playing chess and a general playing chess, yes?
Yes, that's true. We've had both of those playing
so
chess.
There is a little reference to that.
Rick, do you know anything about Terrence Feely, the guy that wrote the episode?
Yeah, he was quite an experienced writer at the time. He'd written for a few well-known British drama series, including The Avengers. I'm sure you both know The Avengers series. He wrote some
yes.
And
Emma Peel.
Calm down.
Was he a friend of McGoohan's, or?
He was. Basically, how it came about was that he'd written for the Avengers, and he'd also written for a drama called No Hiding Place, which was probably not well known in the States, but well known here in the UK. And in early 1966, he was talking to McGoohan about perhaps working on a movie together. And McGoohan said, well, I'm actually working on this kind of new psychological thriller series. I want you to meet George Markstein, who's my script editor for the series. So Terence Feely went on that George Markstein. It was George Markstein's job to incentivize and pick the writers for the episodes for The Prisoner. And they had a sit-down meeting, and Feely said, well, I've immediately got an idea about what would happen if they put someone, a number 6 lookalike in the village to try and throw number 6 himself. And Markstein loved the idea and said, great, you go off and write that. At that point, they had some early stuff done already. They'd had 4 different episode number 2s written at that point. So Feely was able to kind of look at that a little bit and put some of the elements in it. And that's how it came about that he wrote the episode. He went on to write one more for the series called The Girl Who Was Deaf, which comes much later on.
Really? He wrote that one too, huh?
Yeah, he wrote that one as well.
And the director of this episode, I think, directed 4 episodes total, right?
Yeah, Pat Jackson directed 4 episodes altogether. You're quite correct. And interestingly, Everyman Films, which was the production company that McGoohan and David Tomlin set up to make The Prisoner, Terence Feely ended up being a director of the company after The Prisoner was made. Nothing more was made by Everyman Films. It was only so he joined at the wrong time, really. He became a director and then it went bankrupt. But
I know this is a little off the subject tonight, but when I was looking at, I think, the 3rd or 4th episode, I noticed it was written by Patty Fitz, and it seems to me in the back of my mind, wasn't that a pseudonym for McGoohan?
It was indeed. Paddy being short for Patrick, and Fitz was the part of his mother's maiden name. His mother's maiden name was Fitzpatrick, so he's
okay.
You're exactly
Fitzpatrick. Irish much?
Yeah, exactly. Yes, his mother being Irish, of course. No, you're quite correct. So it's great how one person can lead to another person and then lead to another person and create something so wonderful. I mean, Tracy, I'm sure you've had experiences on your shows where someone introduces somebody to somebody else, and then that person comes in and joins the team and becomes an integral part of it.
1,000,000 times, absolutely. Yes.
And McGoohan loved the writers that Markstein chose. Although George Markstein and Patrick McGoohan ended up kind of falling out and not seeing eye to eye, McGoohan was always very pleased.
Didn't George Markstein have some experience in spycraft, and he chose all the writers?
Yeah, you're exactly correct. He was a journalist, and he was a journalist for lots of kind of military type magazines. So he was very much on kind of the Secret Service kind of elements of military service, and he studied that a lot when he was a journalist. And yes, because he was working in the 60s on some of the TV shows of the 60s, like No Hiding Place, he knew a lot of the writers that were based in British TV. And what McGoohan said to him was, look, I don't want Danger Man type writers. I don't want normal stuff in The Prisoner. His phrase was, find someone with a bent of mind who can write kind of slightly left field of what we'd normally expect in television. And that's what Mark Stein did, and that's why almost every episode of The Prisoner that's not written by McGoohan or Mark Stein kind of has weird elements to it, very sci-fi elements, like the Schizoid Man and like the
I call it spy-fi.
Perfect. Yeah, exactly. And I think he did a great job, and I really like this episode. I think it's nice to have episodes which aren't necessarily as heavy as some of the other episodes. Free For All is a very heavy allegorical episode, which is the one we watched last one. It's very allegorical. It's all about this is the world around us, and this, the village is what's happening in the world today. It's nice that the series is broken up by what you might call more conventional sci-fi. I think that helps the series. I think if every episode was incredibly deep, your brain would have gone by now. So I think having some kind of, it's still off the wall, but having some more conventional sci-fi type episodes like this one, I think really helped the series. And I think this one's executed really well. I think there's a great guest cast. I think Jane Merrow as Alison is excellent.
Definitely.
She was in Danger Man. And McGoohan particularly wanted her to work on The Prisoner because he knew he could work with her. He knew there's a sort of frisson in their relationship on screen. I think Anton Rogers is a very good number 2. I think Earl Cameron is excellent as the supervisor, and I'd like to have seen him.
Actually, it's interesting that you mention Earl Cameron, because with his appearance as a supervisor for the village, this is the first and maybe only appearance of a black actor in the show. The role is rather pedestrian by contemporary standards, with the character only having brief bits of dialogue. But within the civil rights movement here in America, where this show was broadcast on CBS during the 60s, it was definitely an intriguing development to have a black man in a supervisory role. Now,
doesn't he mention being from Haiti or something like that in the episode? Yeah,
correct. In real life,
rival network NBC, Star Trek had Uhura, who appeared in 66 of the 79 episodes, and while her role as communications officer might be seen as relatively minor by modern standards, she did take an active role in some episodes of the original series. Either way, more credit is due given the different standards of the 60s. And
you mentioned, Rick, Anton Rogers. Was that the name of number 2 in Schizoid Man?
Correct.
I thought what was interesting about him was he's more jovial and sort of unthreatening than most of the number 2s. He seems to always have a bit of like a whimsical sense of humor in it, which is pretty unusual for number 2. So I thought that worked pretty well too.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I agree with you. Yeah, I do agree. I think that it almost unsettles number 6, doesn't it? That he's being so pally and so kind of laid back with it, and you can see that number 6 is quite unsettled by that. He kind of, why are you being my chum?
Absolutely.
And the actor
also,
that
I think
portrays this number 2, Anton Rogers, reminds me a lot of Christopher Eccleston as the Doctor.
Oh, interesting.
And speaking of Star Trek, The Next Generation, one of Tracy's episodes, used the title The Schizoid Man, with an episode featuring a man who transplants his mind into data. And I have to say, Tracy, rewatching that episode, I found that in juxtaposition, I enjoyed it more than this episode of The Prisoner. I discovered in my research that it turns out that the character of the week in that episode was meant to be played by Patrick McGoohan. Is that right, Tracy?
Believe it or not, I'd never heard that. That would have really excited me if I'd known that, but no. But I can honestly tell you that the reason that I called the episode The Schizoid Man, in a lot of my writings, I like to do little homages to things that I personally like. A lot of times no one in the world will have any idea that I'm doing that. But another example would be I did an episode of Sliders that was called Into the Mystic. and that just happens to be a Van Morrison song that I've always particularly loved. So whenever I can do that, I try to do it. And in this case, the Schizoid Man had always been my favorite prisoner episode, and it goes back to when I first saw the show when I was really young, and that was the first episode that I really remember totally blowing my mind. I mean, I had appreciated the early episodes, but when the Schizoid Man came along, I was just amazed by the complexity of the plot. I mean, at a certain point, it just gets almost ridiculously complex, but yet it still works, for me. So I always remembered that episode more than any other. And when I was doing Star Trek and was working on this story that had a similar plot line in a certain, subtle way, I thought the Schizoid Man would be great to name it that. And it was just sort of be my way to let the world and anyone that was interested know how much I really loved that prisoner episode. But I would guess that 99% of people have no idea that it's even connected to the prisoner, but that's where that came from.
I think, maybe I'm off base here, but I think that the TNG audience was pretty hip,
Yeah, it usually was. That's true.
So just kind of wrapping up the Star Trek Next Generation talk, Susie Plaxon was in that episode, who to date was the hottest Vulcan to inhabit the role.
That's
and
true.
I wanted to ask you, Tracy, in the small amount of time you spent with Patrick McGoohan, did he seem like an angry person to you or just a perfectionist?
I was kind of expecting that he was going to be somewhat angry, and that he was also, I was worried because I'd heard rumors that he had been drinking heavily, but I have no idea whether that was true at the time when I met him, but I'd heard that about him. So I can honestly tell you, when I did have that time with him, I don't ever really remember going into a one-on-one with anyone where I was more concerned about, how I was going to come across to him. That was kind of true for Roddenberry to a certain extent too, but with Patrick, I really didn't want to come across where he thought I was just some vapid, fan of his in some way, because I didn't think he would respect that. So I think I was pretty internally concerned at the beginning of my time with him, that I showed him that I really did understand the show, and that I really hopefully did appreciate the show. And I think for the first 15 or 20 minutes, he was a little bit standoffish. He was very cautious. He wasn't really putting much of himself out toward me, which is kind of what I had expected.
You kind of disarmed him.
But at a certain point, he really warmed up. And as we kept going, and I remember being amazed that he was even willing to spend this much time talking to me. I really had not expected that. And by the time we really got going, I mean, it must have been an hour into it or something, he was really personable. He was really friendly, and he was giving in his responses of things I would ask him. He was not just giving me a pat answer or anything. He was really, connecting with me, and I was really honored because I had such respect for him in so many ways. The more I had learned about the prisoner over the years and had met other prisoner fans who knew a lot more about it than I did, the fact that he embodied the sort of one of the themes of the show. I'm sure Rick would probably agree with this. I mean, the theme of individuality, and also of being proudly individualistic in a world that was so intensely trying to, making everyone homogenized into one thing. That was such a great theme to me, and such a important theme for the world. Now, honestly, I think it's even far more important today than it was back then. But that also shows you how prescient he was, because he was predicting a trend in the world that I think most of the people were not picking up on. And it was obviously so important to him. And so he lived that in his life, I think. And so for all of those reasons, can you guys still hear me? Because I've lost your pictures here.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I can
For all those
Tracy.
reasons, he became a real hero of mine. One last thing, it's kind of silly, but I was a quarterback when I was young in high school and stuff, and
I didn't
I was
know
going to
that.
wear number 6, and it was going to be, again, my own little homage to Patrick McGoohan, knowing that no one in American football world is going to know what number 6.
That's probably true. Yeah.
But that's what I was going to wear at one time, just in honor of him and how much I admired him. So, all in all, I mean, he just was like a guy that walked the walk and talked the talk, I think. So, really respect that.
What you're saying is so familiar. Patrick did this deliberately with people he was either being interviewed by or was meeting for the first time. He'd test them out. He'd spend the first 20 minutes or so. You can hear it in his interviews. In every interview I've ever heard him give, he gives a piece of information which isn't quite true, and he says it with a glint in his eye. And he wants to know whether the person who's interviewing him actually knows what he's talking about or not. And if he gets the respect back, he will open up, because he'll think, this guy's okay. I've done my 20 minutes. I've got the measure of who I'm talking to. So the fact that he did that with you, Tracy, is great. Is a great compliment to you, because he was doing that because he understood you, and he knew that you got him, and he knew that you understood him, and you weren't just some sort of identikit person just trying to spin him a yarn or get him to work on a show or whatever. You understood him, and he realized that, and that's why he would then open up. And everyone I've ever spoken to that he did that with has all agreed what a great guy he was. And the facade of, he's going to be angry, he's going to be short with me, just goes out the window after a while, because he was a nice guy.
Rick, you're hitting the nail right on the head, because that's exactly my experience with him, exactly what you just described. I felt the first 20 minutes he was cautious, and he was he was in charge of the interview, obviously. I mean, he knew exactly what he was doing. And then I was so relieved when after a certain amount of time, he just became so much easier to talk to, and he was so open. I just felt he was very kind with me. So It was great. It was great. I'll never forget it.
By the way, not for nothing, Tracy, but I wanted to mention I picked up the first and second seasons of Project Blue Book, the new series that was on the History Channel that got canceled apparently. And in one episode, they mention your dad.
Really?
Yeah.
What was the reference?
There's something about they're going to Las Vegas for Area 51, I think, and somebody says, are you going to catch the Mel Tormé show? I thought that's kind of interesting.
I never heard that, but you know what? I only lasted about 1 or 2 episodes. I think it was 2 episodes of Project Blue Book, and I felt like it might have been one of the only shows that rivaled the remake of The Prisoner for being awful.
Yeah.
There's so many things wrong with that series. It's hard to even start. It'll get me going for an hour, but
it's true.
But since I brought it up now, and we've got Rick here, I want to ask Rick, why in the world do you suppose that the Prisoner remake, the miniseries remake, went so off the rails? Because I'll never forget when I saw it, I had been so excited that they were doing a remake of The Prisoner, and I had anticipated it, and I was very excited to see it, and I watched it with some friends, and it took me about 15 minutes to say, what the hell is going on? I mean, they missed this show so completely. Does anyone really know who was the mastermind behind the remake? Because whoever it was like the worst job I've ever seen.
Not Ian McKellen, but the producers.
Yeah, I mean, it was a co-production, which I think it always never helps. It was a co-production between AMC in the States and ITV in the UK. Once Sky had pulled out, Sky were originally going to do it, and they said, no, we're not going to go near this. The reason for me that it was just such a failure is because they tried too hard to try and be enigmatic, and you can't try to be enigmatic. You either are enigmatic or you're not. Yeah. You can't learn how to be enigmatic. So what they did originally in the 60s, they had the genius of McGoohan, they had Mark Stein's spy knowledge, they had a host of writers who were all experienced writers in the genre, and everybody came together at the same time. They got people who were used to working in film, so cinematically it was always going to look beautiful, and all those things just came together at the right time. There's a phrase here, I don't know if you use this phrase in the States, they call the sun in a bottle, they call lightning in a bottle. And that can only happen when all elements come together almost accidentally. Yeah. And they all join together and they create something that's enigmatic. What the remake people did was, they all sat around and we need to be enigmatic. What can we do that's enigmatic? Let's be this. Let's do that.
And it inevitably always fails.
That's a really good point, but I also think the other problem was all the things that made the series the most interesting to me just seemed to be missing in action. I mean, they didn't really get into all the intriguing things about who's number 2, who's number 1.
Yeah, they clearly had no idea what
it was just horrible. I can't ever remember
in the chat,
something that
Matthew Pounder says it turned me off remakes for life. Ivan Ivanovich says, I read about the remake before it aired, and from what I read, determined never to watch it.
Tracy, you're absolutely correct. All the elements
another one that comes to my mind as being such a misfire for me was the Day the Earth Stood Still movie remake.
Oh, please.
They took such an interesting idea and just bled it dry. I mean, I couldn't even believe what I was seeing. But I definitely think The Prisoner remake is the single worst that I've ever seen. I was stunningly disappointed. I remember it left me in a bad mood for days.
It should have a warning like, police line do not cross.
I think what's most disappointing is that some of the elements that they did have for it would have worked as another show. If they hadn't called it The Prisoner and they'd have just called it, Man Abducted or something, and set it in the same place.
Nowhere Man. Yeah.
Exactly. Persons Unknown. There's other series which do that kind of theme, and it works. But the problem was that they tried to copy The Prisoner, but they copied the wrong bits. They didn't copy the elements that made it so special.
That's very true.
Copied the basic elements, but you need much more than that to be enigmatic. And Patrick McGoohan was a genius. None of the people behind the remake you could ever describe as a genius. Some good actors in it, sure. Ruth Wilson, very good, but creatively, they're not as anyone 1% of enigmatic as Patrick McGoohan was. But they tried to be, and you can't try to be enigmatic, and that's why it was in my opinion, a failure. Believe it or not, some people do enjoy it, and I'll never agree with them. But there are people out there that like it. But,
really?
Well,
I never met
each to his own, said the man who kissed the cow. And I've just dropped in the chat where you can get some cool I Am Not a Number merch. So be on the lookout for that. Matthew Pounder says, The Prisoner was a product of its time. 60s psychedelia, Vietnam, etc. Impossible to recreate. And Ivan Ivanovich says, that warning belongs on most professionally produced programs made in the 21st century.
Rick, I'm sure this says, probably...
you can tell why they failed when you read on their IMDb blurb and it says, taken to an island called The Village. No, the village is on an island, seemingly. They missed the point from the get-go.
Sorry,
yeah,
Tracy,
what's interesting? I was just going to say, I'm sure this is emphasized in your book, but I think it's one thing that's kind of overlooked about the show in some circles that I've been in is how 60s the series really is. I mean, the entire look of the series is so idiosyncratic to the 60s. if you thought, oh, this might have been in the 70s or in the 50s, it really wouldn't fit. There's something about the summer of love, the psychedelica and all of that I think is so visually apparent in the series. And he's right with what he just said. It's such a moment in time, and that's one of the things that my wife first appreciated when we first started watching it. It kind of reminded her of sort of the Sgt. Pepper's period.
Yes.
And it's true.
Which is the album the Beatles were working on when it was being produced. Tracy the Sliders fan blog says, I just finished The Prisoner not long ago. I noticed it makes you constantly think, unlike almost every show today. You feel the emotions in yourself that McGoohan evokes.
I mean, isn't it interesting that a show that is so 60s, and you say visually, you look at it, you know when it was made. It's still relevant, though, in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the noughties, and now the themes within it live on, even if visually it's a product of its time. What
more topical than ever.
Years ahead of its time,
Rick,
everything that I've seen online, about The Prisoner is that it's more topical than ever. As a matter of fact, Ivan Ivanovich says, in a very similar way, remaking The Manchurian Candidate was never going to work.
At least with The Manchurian Candidate, they kind of came up with a few new takes on the same theme. So they altered it enough where you'd say, oh, well, that was worth doing again. I just didn't feel that way with The Prisoner at all, or with Davy Still. But anyway.
Yeah. 2 thumbs down on both of those.
Yeah. Rick, I want to ask you too, while I'm meeting you today. Gil mentioned recently he kind of stumped his audience by saying, where was Patrick McGoohan born? And I guess people thought Ireland or England. And then, it came out that he was born in the U.S., which I'd heard somewhere in the distant past. But did he identify at all? Did he identify at all with his American roots, or did he consider himself?
Later on in life, he very much saw himself as an Irish American. He was born in Astoria, New York. He was born. Moved to Ireland when he was, very, very small. I'm not even sure he was able to talk before he moved to Ireland, which is where his parents are from. Then they moved to England when he was a little bit older, in his teens, and he lived in England until just after he finished making The Prisoner. And then from the early 70s until the day he died in 2009, he lived in the States, and he saw himself as an Irish American.
Apart from a brief layover in Switzerland, I think.
Switzerland, yes. Tax reasons, I'm sure, but don't quote me on that.
Which I think I read in your book, actually.
You may well have done. He very much saw himself as being part of America. And when you
interesting.
When you sort of hear interviews with him, you can hear the drawl of coming out in him in his voice, and I was very, very much saw himself as an Irish American. And interesting, when he was in Danger Man, which obviously was the series that came before The Prisoner, in one episode, the John Drake character says, "I'm an Irish American," and that's how McGoohan saw himself. There was an English
very interesting
because he spent so much time in England. There's an Englishman to him, but he's very much an Irish American.
Now,
did you ever see the movie?
After listening to episode 3 of the audio drama, Your Beautiful Village, the actor playing number 6, Mark Elstraub, really does a good job of imitating Patrick McGoohan, a man whose voice and I dare say accent are unique. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think I like Mark Elstraub's performance. I'm glad that you got a chance to listen to the Big Finish audio drama version. It's not the same as the original series, of course, but I think it's a fine effort and much better than the TV remake. The audio version remake is or reimagining, whatever they want to call it, is
much more true to form. Yeah,
it is, and I think Mark Elstraub gives a good performance. He's slightly angrier. I mean, number 6 is always very angry, but I think he's slightly angrier than possibly it needs to be. But it's I think it's a very good thing. And to answer Tracy's question, I beg your pardon, Tracy, for both of us talking over you there. The Moonshine War, Alan Alda, really interesting film. 1970, I think it was made. Possibly it was just after the Prisoner. He did a few films which were interesting. He did a few films which were awful. Really some bad choices he made later on in his career. Whether he made them purposefully bad choices or whether he made a choice and then it turned out to be bad, I guess we'll never know. But he did some really good movies. Silver Streak, Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor. I've got a lot of time for that movie.
Love that movie.
I think he was great in Braveheart, which obviously came in the 90s.
Scanners.
Probably should have got an Oscar for his performance.
Scanners was my first actual exposure to Patrick McGoohan. That's the first time I ever saw him.
No, he's still.
I think also Ice Station Zebra.
Yeah, Ice Station Zebra was a great example. It's a great example of him stealing every scene he's in. You watch the scene with him and Rock Hudson, and McGoohan thumps the table at one point, and Rock Hudson's hair nearly falls off because of the ferocity of McGoohan's performance. Then Rock Hudson tries to do it himself. It's kind of this limp blanket kind of.
Right. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Steals the scene.
Yep.
Yeah. And it's the same in the Moonshine War. He steals every scene he's in. And that's because he had such an intensity as an actor. I don't think he was massively versatile, but very intense. I don't think you'd ever see McGoohan do warm and cuddly romantic parts, but so he wasn't hugely versatile, but he was so intense that he could grab a performance. All these performances are kind of intense, aren't they? All his best performances are intense. Although Danger Man, there's some subtlety in it. He does some really nice bits and pieces in Danger Man, which are not quite as intense as his other roles, but a great actor. And so, did you say Scanners was the first time you'd ever seen him, Cardinal? That was your first exposure to it.
Scanners. Yeah, I was in junior high school, and everybody was going to see Scanners. Ivan Ivanovich in the chat says, universal themes are what make a work stand the test of time. This is what distinguishes literature from pulp. And Matthew Pounder says, strange how John Drake was only an American in season 1 of Danger Man. And Michael Beacom says, whenever I hear someone trying to do a remake, I want to confront them and say, why do you think yours will be better than the original? They'll be exposed. And Ivan Ivanovich says his performance in Ice Station Zebra makes the film.
Can either of you, Tracy or Cardinal, think of a remake that was better than the original? Because I can't.
Actually, there are a couple. I can't think of them at the moment.
Quick things out. They actually did a remake of the Andromeda
Strain. Your point is well taken.
They did a remake of the Andromeda Strain. It was a miniseries. That was pretty interesting.
They did a remake of Brave New World. I think that was also a miniseries.
But it's a good point. Unless you've got something to say where you can say it better than it was said, why do it? That's a pretty solid point.
Now, I have a question for both of you guys. Did either of you notice that at the end, the helicopter that went up had struts and the one that came down had pontoons?
Yes.
I did not.
Yes, I did not. I know you've been very kind in plugging my website, Gil. If you go on there, there's a tab on the left-hand side saying bloopers. And for every episode, there's about 40 or 50 of those types of moments.
Oh, wow.
Where, where scenes where smoke is going into a chimney backwards, or there's a car parked in the village that shouldn't be there, or as you say, that's a great one. The helicopter takes off, and that. Yeah,
can you direct me to that?
Yeah, if you scroll down and go on the left-hand side, you see there's a picture of a lighthouse. I think 2 tabs under that, there's a green square with a picture of a helicopter. It says "Prisoner Bloopers."
Oh, yeah, right there.
Click on that. It's in episode order.
Oh, wow. So you weren't kidding.
Click on that.
Look at all the ones in just Arrival. My goodness. Wow. I'm going to consume this in great detail. Yep.
Guys, can we also talk about...
Caught that.
Can we also talk about the ending of the episode?
Of course.
Of course.
I thought
I thought it was a perfect ending. I mean, just the way that Anton Rogers played that last scene too. It was the perfect ending because I remember when I first saw it again. You know, you're thinking he's maybe outsmarted them and gotten away at least for a little while, and the helicopter goes in a circle and lands right on the same spot, and that's when the number 2 mentions that Susan has been dead for a year.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. I mean, to me, as from a writing point of view,
I knew it was coming.
Yeah, well, I'm sure a lot of people
as soon as I saw the photo and he put it into his pocket and it said "Love Susan," I knew. I mean, I've seen it before, but not in a long time, and I knew from a writer's perspective, like you said, Tracy, that was coming.
Since we get into minutia on this show too, I thought the picture of Susan was kind of odd. I mean, I was expecting they would have picked some, you know, semi-beautiful or pretty woman that the guy had been married to, and the woman was kind of beastly, I'm sorry to say.
Kind of drab.
Even more than drab. But another thing I wanted to ask you guys was, am I misreading this, or when they call the girl in the episode Allison, how often do they use a real name for a person? I thought that was odd.
Not
too,
many.
that they called her Allison.
Only about 4 or 5 times.
This episode has Curtis and Allison.
Curtis, right.
And that's about it.
Right.
Proper names are generally not used.
Calling him Curtis was very necessary because it helped to differentiate the two characters. So I understood that. But I was kind of surprised that they called her Allison. I thought, why are they calling her by that name?
Well, that helps the story along when they establish a rapport together with their, you know, using the Zener cards, and then later when she comes in, when number 2 asks her, or when I guess number 6 asks her to come, because that'll be proof, using the human element rather than a machine. I think that helps play that up. And the Sliders fan blog says, I did enjoy the 70s remake of Invasion of the Body Snatchers more than the 50s version.
Zach's just going to bring up. It's so weird that he said that. The next thing I was going to say was, Gil, can I go back to your question about remakes? So let me just answer that real quickly. I love the original Invasion of the Body Snatchers. It's one of my favorite movies. So when the remake came out with Donald Sutherland, I saw it in a theater, and I remember leaving the theater that day being mildly disappointed in it. And then I saw it again a year or 2 later on cable or something, and I thought, oh my God, I absolutely missed a totally brilliant movie. Now I'm as big a fan of the remake as I am of the original. And one of the reasons is what they did that I thought was so brilliant. If you go back and watch the first movie, it's all about small town paranoia. And then if you watch the remake with Donald Sutherland, it's all about big city paranoia. They're totally 2 different things. And they did such a masterful job of making that remake worthwhile. So even to this day, I love both of those films pretty equally. And I can't say there's any other remake that even comes close to that for me. But I think
it's funny that you mentioned that, Tracy. As a professional musician for 25 years, and a producer for most of the bands that I was in, when you approach covering a song, you can either do it exactly the way the band that wrote the song did it, or you can put your own spin on it. But if you do anything else, there's no reason to cover it.
I agree.
That's my belief anyway.
But I think that the Donald Sutherland version of the film, it's not as universally recognized in this day and age for being as brilliant as the first one. but it really is in its own way. I mean, if you go back and you watch the remake, one of the things also that I think is so amazing about the Donald Sutherland film, they get into so many subliminals in it. And it's kind of like Rick was saying, if you go out with the idea, well, we're going to do some subliminals and we're going to, magnify them, it doesn't really work. But if you do them properly, it just blends into the movie. And if you watch the remake, there's one scene where a couple of the characters are just crossing the street on what seems to be a normal day. And if you go back and watch it again, because I did this, the soundtrack is just laden with a million things that you don't even notice the first time. But if you watch it again, someone in the distance is screaming, and there's a siren going off, and there's various things that just subliminally enhance the scene and make you uneasy. And I totally missed it the first time I saw it. And the second time I saw it, it stood out, like it had a magnifying glass on it. So to answer your original question, I think that movie is the best example of a remake that lives up to the original, even though the original was great. So anyway, that's my opinion on that.
Ivan Ivanovich in the chat mentions, in Chimes of Big Ben, we are told the woman's name is Nadia. And not only that, they give her last name as well.
That's
the
true.
reason that they
I remember
do that
that
in
now.
this episode and in that episode, it's to show the viewer that the characters trust each other. So what we are to assume is that Alison calls him by his name as well. We just don't hear it on screen because then it would give away, things that McGoohan didn't want you to know about.
Or maybe he plays his cards close to his vest,
Maybe.
I also thought that
all the times that a character name is mentioned, it's because number 6 and that person are close. So in Arrival, there is Cobb.
Yeah, they're establishing the rapport between those characters.
Exactly. We've got Alison.
I also love the scene in the Schizoid. Sorry, I was going to say I love the scene in Schizoid Man also because I think it's played very subtly and I really like it. When she owns up to having betrayed him with the card thing, the way that she tells him that if she had a chance to do it again, she wouldn't, was perfect.
Actually,
because
I have that right here.
Great.
I did a lot of research. So this episode does end on a rather sobering note as Six prepares to make what he hopes will be his escape. He encounters Alison again, and the following conversation occurs. Alison: I'm ashamed of what I did to number 6 yesterday. 6: Why are you telling me? Alison: Everyone has to tell someone. 6: It was your job. Alison: It was a betrayal. 6: Isn't everything we do here a betrayal? Alison: It's not often one gets a second chance. 6: There are no second chances. Alison: There are some times, for the lucky ones. If I had a second chance, I would like you to know that I wouldn't do it again.
That's a beautiful scene too, because the way that scene is written, again, the standard way to do it would for her to just tell him, I'm so sorry I betrayed you or whatever, but she still talks about it in the abstract as if she's not comfortable enough, because she probably thinks she's being surveilled, to come right out and say what she's thinking. So she sort of couches it in different language.
That's a good point.
It's just brilliant. I love that scene, and I think that whole script, the only real flaw in the script, in my opinion, but there was almost no way around it, is the explanation for how he breaks the spell of grabbing the faulty light,
the lamp,
things like that.
Yeah,
that sounded a bit contrived to me. But you know what? I thought about it and thought, how else could they have done it?
It's the only way they could have done it, isn't it? Even though it isn't perfect. You're quite right.
It's true.
Right.
Yeah.
Could I just answer somebody in the chat, Gil? Someone's just put up a thing about Jane Merrow to say that RMB, whoever that is, claim that Jane Merrow didn't get along with Patrick McGoohan. I find this hard to believe. She was in 3 episodes of Danger Man.
What Ivan Ivanovich is saying is that Robert Meyer Burnett claimed that Jane Morrow didn't get along with Patrick McGoohan. I find this hard to believe. She was in 3 episodes of Danger Man as well as this.
Yeah.
And that's one of 2.
I've interviewed Jane twice about The Prisoner. She absolutely loved working with Patrick McGoohan. She said he may not have let her in personally, but he really let her in as an actor. And she said she felt her most challenged as an actor when working with McGoohan. She loved working with McGoohan. If you go online, in a blog all about working with McGoohan, she absolutely. He
continues by saying, if she disliked Patrick McGoohan, then she's one of the greatest actresses of the age.
Yeah.
Wasn't she the lady that committed suicide?
No, Jane Merrow is still with us. Jane Merrow, I interviewed her 2 years ago at Elstree Studios. She's still very much alive, still very much in the business.
Get out of town. Did you really?
Yeah.
Didn't you say, Gil, that she had committed suicide?
No, the woman, I think, was it A, B, and C?
No. There's two. The most famous one is the girl in Arrival, Virginia Maskell. Yeah. Who plays
That's exactly what I'm thinking of. Sorry. Virginia Maskell. Yeah. Yes, Virginia who?
Virginia Maskell, Maskell.
Maskell, yeah.
Do we know why she?
Yeah.
Do we know why she committed suicide?
We do. It's very sad. It was postnatal depression. I'm afraid she
oh wow,
was very depressed and took her own life. It's very, very sad because she was was a fine actress, but times were different then. There wasn't the support, I guess, that there is now for people that are suffering depression, and she suffered alone and had enough.
Yeah, so there was a stigma attached to depression at that time. How old was
she when she died, Rick?
I'd have to look that up, but
in her 20s.
It was only
that young.
She was only 2 years after The Prisoner was filmed, so it was very, very.
Yeah, it had to be at least late 20s or early 30s. Yeah. Michael Beacom says, Allison knows it's number 6, and she's telling him so she won't blow his cover this time.
Yeah, there's a great bit in that scene where they light a cigarette, and she's.
That's where he starts to light it.
Him. Yeah,
right.
She's standing behind him getting a cigarette out, and he
just holds the light up
and lights it behind himself. That's fantastic, isn't it?
Yeah. What was great too is when he starts to light her cigarette, he catches himself. You can see that he's realizing, I hope I didn't just blow it. So it's great. Yeah.
And he makes some excuse, doesn't he? About I'm always playing with lighters. That's silly. Obviously.
That's right. Yeah. This is off on a tangent. I don't know if you want to get into, but you were talking about remakes.
Tracy, be as tangential as you like.
Okay. You were talking about remakes, and there was a movie. It's a British movie. That's also why I'm mentioning this for Rick, that I wanted to remake, and I looked into it for quite a while. And it's a brilliant science fiction movie called The Day the Earth Caught Fire. And what's weird is...
Yeah, Leo McKern.
I love that thing. Yes, exactly. And
I have the Blu-ray just out of reach.
When I was looking into remaking it, I did a little bit of research on it. There was a very pretty actress named Janet Monroe, and she was the star of that movie. And she had only been known for doing Disney movies when she was younger. But in this movie, she's definitely an adult. It's kind of actually a racy part. She's nude at one point in it. Anyway,
she's not related to Caroline Monroe by any chance.
I don't think so. I know that's another British actress, right? But
no,
anyway, I found out a little bit of... Sorry?
Slightly different spelling of Monroe. I think Janet Monroe doesn't have an E on the end.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I found out about her, and I was so shocked. And once we were talking about the lady from The Prisoner, she committed suicide at a very, very young age. And I had seen some of her work in Disney movies and also in Day the Earth Caught Fire. Mm-hmm. And she seemed like had such a positive energy. And I ended up finding out about her life and how she had also gotten into some strange depression when she was in her 20s and had killed herself. But I was thinking about that because when we were talking about the suicide from The Prisoner, it just flashed into my mind, and I had already been thinking about that movie because you'd asked the question about remakes. And I was thinking, oh, there's a movie I always wanted to remake because I thought with better special effects and stuff. it could be better.
Days,
but
you could probably pull it off with a pretty.
I really
slight
recommend
budget.
that movie to your listeners. It's a great movie, in my opinion. There's a British director and writer named Val Guest. You know him, Rick?
Yeah,
and
very
it was
much
his
so.
movie. Yeah.
He did some great stuff.
Matthew
It's
Pounder
still,
in
to
the
me,
chat says Val Guest very underrated.
That's
And
right.
Ivan Ivanovich says Jane Morrow was in an episode of UFO as a journalist who attempts to seduce Colonel Straker, a favorite episode of Us Toxic Males, by the way.
She was in a lot of stuff in both sides of the Atlantic, because she was in all the great 60s shows, The Avengers, Randall and Hopkirk, UFO, Danger Man, The Prisoner, and then she moved to Hollywood in the early 70s, and then she did all the great American shows, The Incredible Hulk, $6 Million Man.
I loved those shows when I was a kid.
Yeah, and she was in all of those, so she did great. And as I say, she's still going, still acting. So it's great to see that there's not many from The Prisoner still around, but she's one of them. And
and you're absolutely right about Leo McKern. He was very prominent in Day the Earth Caught Fire. He's actually brilliant in it. If your audience hasn't seen that movie or doesn't know it that well, I really recommend that film. And when I was thinking of remaking it, I had to watch it like 6 different times, and so I know it really, really well. And that's a really topical film in a lot of ways for today too, because of the climate change mania that's going on now.
Yep.
So anyway, yeah.
Michael Beacom points out in the chat, Janet Monroe, not related to Caroline, starred in Darby O'Gill and the Little People with some Scotsman or other. Heard he went on to bigger things.
Yeah,
Michael
that's what she
Beacom
was known for originally, was the Disney films.
I saw Darby O'Gill and the Little People in the theater, and the Banshee scared the living shit out of me. I was really surprised at the scenes with number 6 and number 12, that they looked so good, and not like that South Park episode where they make fun of Mirror Mirror with the line going down the middle of the screen between the two Cartmans.
No, the effects on the Prisoner are great for their time. And they also filmed a lot with a double, Patrick McGoohan's. Whenever it's a back shot, it's Frank Mayer, who was Patrick McGoohan's double. That's the back of his head. And they filmed every scene twice. So they filmed every scene with Frank Mayer in the white blazer, and they filmed every scene with McGoohan in the dark blazer, so they could have the 2 angles all the time. So they could swap between which one was on camera, which one was behind the camera. So they filmed it all twice with the help of a guy called Tony Sloman, who did a lot of kind of insert material for that as well. Quite well done for the time, considering it was late autumn of 1966, and I think it stands up really well. You can't really see the join as well as you can.
Not at all. Especially in this beautiful remastered version. If there were a line to see, it would pop right out.
Yeah.
And it didn't at all.
Hey, Patrick, I should know the answer to this, but the car, the sports car in the opening sequence.
His name is Rick.
Did I call you Patrick? Oh my God, I'm so sorry.
I'm quite flattered.
Is the car a Lotus?
It is
kind of myself.
Correct. It's a Lotus 7. Originally, they were going to have a Lotus Elan, which is what the car from the Avengers that Mrs. Emma Peel, calm down, Cardinal, calm down, was driving. McGoohan turned up at Lotus, and he was ready there to have a conversation about the Elan, and he saw a line of cars on the forecourt of the showroom. And at the end was this little Lotus 7, and he just looked over and he said, "That's the car I want." He said, "I want something. I want something individual. I want something individual that this man, I want to show that he's got freedom and individuality. That's the car that says it to me." So, they used this Lotus 7. They then sold it before the series had finished, and it got written off in a car accident. So they then had to find another car which looked the same. So they rented one for later episodes, and then they couldn't get that for the last episode when you see it again. So they then hooked up another car to make it look like the original car. So there were actually 3 different 7s in this. But yeah, Lotus 7. You're quite right, Tracy. You're going to win the Prisoner quiz today, I have to say.
Well, I always wanted a Lotus, so that made sense.
Tracy,
Yeah.
it occurs to me,
Yeah.
now, you may be, as a writer, you may disown me, but it occurs to me in retrospect that while watching the episode, I was somewhat more willing to suspend my disbelief in its premise. But of course, even with the drugs and the aversion therapy, this silly attempt at confusing number 6 as to who he really is one of the weakest ploys used, at least so far, by any number 2 to break 6. It loses inherent verisimilitude, and almost immediately after watching it, although that certainly may not have played that way in 1967.
I disagree with you about that because
I knew that you would.
to me, the whole concept of trying to convince someone that they're really not who they are, they're someone else. That if you start from that point, like, well, how would you go to someone and tell them that they're someone else? And the ways they choose to do it, I mean, sometimes it's a little silly, like the flapjack thing. I think that's a little bit silly, but the left hand, right hand thing, just the fact that he starts to reach for things with his left hand without even thinking about it. If that happened to anyone who spent their life being right-handed, how disconcerting would that be? That would just make you wonder if up is down, you know? So
that's a good point.
To me, it's such a challenge to try to pull that off in an hour of a show and make them go through the whole arc where they start off, of course, arrogantly disbelieving it. And then over time, I think that at a certain point, it comes closer to working on him than anything else they try, in the sense
well,
that...
like I said, there was a point where I've lost track of who was whom, and I think that really helped sell that idea.
I think what we've got to remember as well is that he's already had his identity stolen from him by being in the village in the first place. So it really is a mind bender for him that the only identity he has left is then taken away from him again, because all he's got left is the fact that number 6 and he lives in this cottage. He doesn't have any other part of his identity left. He doesn't have any friends. He doesn't have any family. Obviously, he resigned from his job.
He's alone. Yeah,
he's completely alone. And then the only things he's got to identify with are then taken away again, and he's now in a new cottage that he's called number 12.
And one thing that I saw in the episode that really resounded with me was that number 12 kept saying, "I am number 6, I am number 6," over and over again. And this is something that they've been trying to get number 6 to do, to break him, to reduce him to the number. And while we may never hear his name, although I think at some point they call him, or he calls himself Peter something or other, it's insidious the way that number 12 outshoots him, outfences him. Because I mean, think about it. I used to be a fencer. When I was in second grade, they were using a mnemonic device in saying your right hand is the hand that you write with. And I'd already been writing for a long time by then, and I said, I write with my left hand. And literally, get this, guys, in public school, the teacher said, and I quote, "Well, we'll fix that." So evidently she went to a Catholic school. But when they switched me over, everything that I learned to do before that, I still do left-handed. Everything I learned how to do after that, I do right-handed. So I call myself half ambidextrous. And Michael Beacon from the chat says, medicine is just like anything else. A claw hammer in the hand of a house builder is a good thing. In the hand of a serial killer, a bad thing. On its own, it's just neutral. And Yvonne replies, of course, perversion of technology for evil ends is a recurring theme in the program. Medicine and psychology are often so depicted. And the Sliders fan blog says, sort of the thing where if you hear something long enough, you will come to believe it, which I think speaks to what Tracy was saying before. Michael Beacom mentions, from the beginning, number 6 has been saying, I am not a number, to make him demand he is number 6. That's a special brand of insidiousness.
Mm-hmm. Good point. Doesn't he say 666, or he keeps repeating it over and over as he passes out? That's the way I remember it. But yeah, I mean, and isn't there a moment when he's in the midst of this subterfuge they're doing on him that you can just sort of feel him starting to, for the first time in the show, starting to break down, you know? I don't think there's another time that I really remember, at least earlier than this in the series, where you get the feeling it's working. And that's why I think they ran into the problem script-wise. Now, how do they get out of it? How in the world do they reverse it before the episode is over? So I think the grabbing the flickering light and giving himself an electrical shock, when I first thought about that, I thought that's kind of weak. And then I thought, well, on the other hand, it kind of works, because what else are you going to do? You're going to, how are you going to reverse it in the amount of time they have
brilliant.
left? I started to appreciate it more as time went on, but
yeah,
I remember when I first saw it, I thought that's a little bit weak, but ultimately it worked, I guess.
Now, another thing I wanted to talk about was the idea of body swapping, which is rather prolific in all sorts of fiction. Red Dwarf and even Star Trek the original series both have their own takes on body swapping, and this takes the move a step farther by having the two characters swap positions in society and therefore personalities. Now, recently I picked up the first 8 seasons of Red Dwarf and have been watching them pretty much all the way through. It's one of my favorite shows, and the writing is great, and it's good enough that it's one of the very few successful science fiction comedy shows. In fact, seeing as it's still in production and the science fiction is well done, not just sci-fi, perhaps the most successful. And in this episode, both 6 and 12 are played by Patrick McGoohan. Actors playing double duty is certainly not unheard of in science fiction. Brent Spiner played Data and Lore in several episodes of The Next Generation, really getting to stretch his acting muscles and prove, I think, that he was the best actor in that cast. While Robert Llewellyn played Crichton and Abel in the Red Dwarf episode Beyond a Joke, McGoohan is unique in that he was also the creator of the show, although he isn't the writer of the episode, in contrast to Beyond a Joke, whose first draft was penned by Llewellyn before Doug Naylor tore into it. So you have to figure that McGoohan had in his own mind the gravitas of how the episode fits into the canon and delivered on his performance of the two characters the way that he did.
I'm glad you're loving Red Dwarf, Cardinal. Do you have a favourite season?
Gosh.
Season 2 is my favourite. I think it was at its best when they had the original Holly, and the episode Queeg is just genius. So season 2 is my favourite.
They're all so good. It's hard. It's like trying to pick between your children, you know. Now, this episode allows McGoohan to craft 2 different interpretations of his character. 6 remains his stoic, straight-laced, irritable self. 12, on the other hand, cuts a slightly looser, more quirky figure. Hence their choice of clothing during the ensuing battle of character traits between the 2 characters. 6 is dressed in black, 12 in white. And much as the village might be trying to break every resident down into a bland, blank slate, the fact is that most, if not all, of the residents within the, had a past before they were brought to this candy-colored, mostly sunny hellhole. Undoubtedly, their actions in the village have to be partially influenced by what placed them there, even if years of brainwashing have made them complacent, supportive, and too scared to challenge the status quo.
Can I ask you both what you felt about the visuals of this particular episode? Because it's one of the episodes where there is no footage of Portmeirion, which is the village, at all. Every single scene is filmed on a studio
Indoors.
Set. And even the outdoor sequences that you see are a studio set. Did that fool you? Did you watch thinking, well, that's clearly a studio street, or
No, it absolutely felt like it was the village. And to answer your question, Rick, one thing that I noticed was there were several times when they gave him a shot of something, when they drugged him, but they stopped short of showing it entering the vessel, and I noticed that. I'm not really sure.
Could have shown something like that on British TV in the 60s. I think that would have, if they'd have filmed that would have been cut, I think.
Well, it seemed to me like in previous episodes when they've drugged him by injection, I think in A, B, and C, it might have been off screen, but they definitely did inject something into him more than once. And it might just be that the way that, it was built just put me in the mindset.
You would never see the needle going into the skin. It's inferred because you see them go up to him.
It's implied. Yeah.
And then you see the scar afterwards on the wrist or whatever. And it's inferred like that. But, that's just a thing of its time. British TV, this was shown 8 o'clock on a Friday evening or whatever. It needed to be not
sure. It's a family time. Yeah.
No, that's it. And their fight sequences are kind of done in that sort of traditional way where you don't particularly see much blood. You don't hear any bones cracking or whatever. You just see the guy fly over the bottom and then he's unconscious. And that's just the way things were done. And the same is probably true in Star Trek as well. You didn't see necessarily a lot of blood. It was just a lot of hitting on the back of the neck and then the guy would. Ugh.
They almost looked like Star Trek red shirts. The two guys.
It was green Vulcan blood. They don't usually show it.
Yeah. Actually, it's funny you mentioned that, Tracy, because while I was doing research on this episode, I thought back to the original series and how McCoy always talks about him being a green-blooded hobgoblin, but I don't recall ever seeing any green blood.
No, nor me.
This is a little bit of a slightly different thing than what you're talking about. One of the things that Roddenberry told me that was so interesting, he was bitching on about how stupid the network executives were, and he told me they hated Mr. Spock, and they absolutely, when he did the original pilot, they absolutely wanted Spock out of the show, and he said we were going to lose Spock, so he said he came up with a contrivance, which was to have Spock start to smoke a green cigarette, which blew green smoke into the air, and they loved it. And it's what saved Spock. And I said, well, you never did that, did you? He goes, oh, of course not. He goes, I never had any intention of doing it. Of course, it's the stupidest idea in the world, but he knew they would go for it.
And the suits fell for it.
Yeah, yeah.
And by the way, thank goodness for Lucille Ball. She was entirely responsible for Star Trek.
Desilu? Mm-hmm.
Yes. Getting onto the air. So thank goodness for her.
Do you feel
Ivan Ivanovich says, great sets and effects can't rescue a bad story and wooden acting. See Prometheus.
Tracy,
what were you going to say, Rick?
Yeah, but did you feel when you were watching it that it was a particularly British show, The Prisoner, or did you feel that it was quite universal and that as an American you could identify with it as much as I could as an Englishman?
Well, that's a good question. Number one, I never felt it was Americanized at all. In fact, I was going to ask you, were there any American actors in The Prisoner? I wouldn't even be able to name one. But to answer your question more directly,
only in one episode.
Okay. I felt it was a very, very European show. Not so much that it was British so much, but I definitely felt like
international.
Yeah, a lot of the references they make are to European countries that we're not even that familiar with over here. The Baltic countries or the Scandinavian countries.
Nadia mentions Poland and Romania or Bulgaria, something like that.
So I always felt it was extremely European by
France and so on.
American standards. Now, it's kind of interesting to me. It's one of the reasons I asked you that question about whether he identified with being an American or American-born. You would think, given the Cold War period that was going on, that there would be a lot more about the Americans and, say, the Russians battling for position in the world like a chessboard. And in my mind, you'd know better than me, there really wasn't much of that I ever saw. There's certainly the idea that there are different masters. Have you gone over to the other side? And I guess that implies that have you gone over to the East Germans or the Russians or whatever? But it's not really spelled out very much, is it? Rick, am I missing something there?
It's not. No, you're quite right. And even number 6's, nationality is never.
It's supposed to keep you guessing, right?
He's British, even. I think one of the number 2s, that was Ongadine in A, B, and C said, "Oh, you're going on an English holiday," and that's the only time.
Ongadine, thank you. That's how it's pronounced.
And I know
I had such trouble with that.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. Everything is kind of left sort of nebulous. We don't know where the village is. We don't know what nationality he is, although we assume he's British because he works in London or whatever.
Now, Rick, Michael Beacom in the chat has a comment to you. It says, Rick, the show was presented by my local channel as definitely European fare, not American programming. Ditto The Avengers and others shown on public television.
Well, there's a lot of shows which are kind of sold on the fact that they're very British. The Avengers is one. Comedies like Benny Hill are another. It's kind of, this is a quintessentially British show. But the point I was making to Tracy, and I'm glad that Tracy answered my question, was that this wasn't really sold as a British espionage show. It wasn't really sold as this is an English TV program, although it was, and it was sold to CBS, while it was being made. It wasn't sold as a British show in the same way that the Avengers probably was. So thank you, Tracy, for answering that. That's very interesting.
Sure, of course. And Rick, also I want to tell you, because I might have mentioned this to Gil a few weeks ago, but when the show first appeared on U.S. television, I very much remember it was like considered a summer replacement series, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're just going to be on for a brief time in the summer. But I remember when it came on, we were just all startled by the show the first time we saw it, that it was truly unlike anything we were used to on American TV at all. And the fact that my parents knew Patrick's work and they knew about Danger Man, which again at that point wasn't really known in the U.S., especially by that title. If I hadn't had them to really tell me what the origins of this were, I might have been befuddled. I might not have been able to follow it. But I do remember from the very beginning of the first episode, it startled us. We just felt like it was something completely different. For us, anyway.
And now
probably would not have seemed so different. It wouldn't have seemed so completely different for a European or especially a British audience. But at least in America, it was very groundbreaking in so many ways.
It was here. Believe me, no one in the UK had ever seen anything like this. I would argue haven't seen anything like it since either. There's been shows which have tried to be like The Prisoner, but
I don't think there's been a show before or since that was like it.
Totally agree with you. I totally agree. And what's interesting is a couple of people in the chat are saying, well, yeah, it's clearly British because number 6 lives in London. Well, John Drake in the first series of Danger Man lived in London, but he was still in America. So you can be kind of based in one city and be from somewhere else.
And Slider's fan blog says, slightly British to me, but not overtly. However, as Ivan Ivanovich says, he lives in London. And Ivan Ivanovich says, when it aired in the U.S., it was the most surreal thing anyone here had ever seen.
Mm-hmm. Especially in
Rick,
that slot. It was
another question for you from Michael Beacom is, Rick, I don't think they knew what the hell it was in its run on 70s public TV as part of a Brit TV package. Monty Python, Benny Hill, The Goodies, Avengers, Protectors, UFO, and also Doctor Who, of course.
Which are, very.
Do you know about the psychological element when they re-aired it in the U.S. on PBS? The psychiatrist that sat watching the episodes with his dog sitting next to him. You remember that whole thing?
Yeah,
and I think that was called The Psychology of the Prisoner, where they really went into a lot of detail on what they thought each episode meant, strictly from a psychological point of view. So it was interesting because I think that was the first time that The Prisoner had been re-aired in the U.S. since the original run on CBS. I could be wrong about that, but it just kind of came out of nowhere.
Fan blog says, it's sort of funny. McGoohan said the show even angered people.
Oh, well, it did. After the final episode, people were phoning up the ITV and complaining about what they'd just seen. We've been sitting here for 16 weeks. We wanted all these answers. We never got the answers. And McGoohan claims that he had to kind of hide himself away because of the reaction he was getting in the street.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
But years after, he said that was great because he said that's what he wanted. He wanted to get people angry. He wanted to stir people up and get them out of their complacency. And realize get them to realize what was going on in the world. And you could argue that no one ever really did, pick up the gauntlet of what he was trying to say, but he certainly got the message out there.
I do think that the final two episodes, which I'm going to need to see again, it's been such a long time.
And remember, no spoilers.
Okay. Well, I'm not going to give away a plot element, but I'll just say that the last two, there was such an expectation for what the quote-unquote answers to the show are going to be that it was so surrealistic in a certain way. I'm not sure that it succeeded, to be really honest. I think it kind of ended with a little bit of a dud, but then on the other hand, to answer the questions they'd built up over the first 15 episodes, it's a pretty impossible task in a lot of ways, I think.
Absolutely. I mean, it sort of had to end the way that it did.
Yeah, without giving any spoilers away, McGoohan, when he was interviewed in about 83, turned around and said, what else could we have done? I couldn't have just ended it. And then it turns out that it's Sean Connery or Roger Moore behind it all. How could I do that? And I think what's great about it is that when you watch those final two episodes a second or a third time, a lot more of the answers make sense. I think the first time you watch it, it's kind of, whoa, okay, what have I just watched? And you're trying to piece it all together. When you watch it a second or a third time, a lot more makes sense than what it would have done originally.
Rick, really I think it was in your book that it mentioned that McGoohan said he doesn't necessarily have to be a spy, or when he was asked, is it John Drake? Of course, because of the rights, they couldn't say one way or the other, but he said he could have been a scientist, and if he had been John Drake, he would have gotten away a lot sooner.
Yeah, that is exactly what McGoohan said. And I think that the point about that, we assume he's a secret agent because he kind of lives that sort of lifestyle and that sort of job. It's never stated in any of the episodes that he is a spy. He clearly hangs around with other scientists. There's an episode where it turns out he's really good friends with Dr. Seltzman, who's a scientific professor. He could have easily been a scientist. There are things that point towards him being that. And McGoohan
let's face it. He knows how to fight. He knows how to shoot a gun. Although I think this is the only episode in which he does, and it's not even a real gun. But he knows how to fence, even in his offhand. He's obviously a secret agent, if you ask me.
or someone in military intelligence with a scientific background, possibly.
That's a good point too.
They would be able to handle themselves. I always took it to be a secret agent. I'm not gonna lie and say, oh no, it's definitely a scientist. I think McGoohan wants people to think outside the box. So when people say it's about a secret agent that's abducted and then he's trying to get out, McGoohan wants you to be deeper than that. He wants you to think, no, this person is anybody. So yes, he is a secret agent, but he's also a greengrocer. He's a baker. He's a prime minister. He's a shop worker. He's anybody that's in a position where they don't want to be in, and that's what the message is, that we're all prisoners in one way or another because of the society we build up around us. So it doesn't matter whether he's a secret agent or a road sweeper. That the message is still the same.
Yeah, we're all in the village. We're all the prisoner. Ivan Ivanovich points out that he boxes, and while
he
a scientist
boxes and he fences, right?
Yeah,
he was an Olympic fencer and a.
Could be.
But I can think of a lot of boxers that aren't secret agents.
Sure. But once you put all the pieces together, it seems to me anyway that it's pretty obvious that he's a secret agent.
That's how I always.
Michael Beacon from the chat says, look, if Sean Connery shows up wearing a tuxedo in a casino with a beautiful woman, do you need to say his name?
That's pretty good, Gil.
Well, thank you, Tracy. I appreciate that very much.
That's the best Roger Moore I've heard in ages.
So, in this episode, he must defy his own identity to rescue it in the long run. To combat the village, he must appease them as they commit another round of psychological torture, trickery on two fronts, this time using 6 and 12. 12 is a patsy in the end. He's used to turn citizen against citizen, captive against captive. It's a localized scenario, but it demonstrates yet again the ability for the village to manipulate all in their attempt to break 6. And personally, I don't feel that their attempt to psychologically destroy number 6 really almost succeeded. We get the impression that even though the drugs and the aversion therapy, all through that, 6 was really in control the entire time. The way 6 recalls his identity is brilliant. Fate memories combined with the reference to personal bodily harm accidentally inflicted on him, the bruised fingernail that's still growing, and a calendar that was never turned, that demonstrates why number 2's plan was doomed to fail. Don't you think?
Mm-hmm. I think that's absolutely.
I actually think there is a moment in the piece when he is starting to crack. And I think it's about the only time I can remember in the series. There's probably other times I'm not thinking of. But I definitely got the feeling myself that he was teetering on the edge.
They're watching him sleeping and he's having a nightmare, and they comment to each other, number 2 and the supervisor, don't they? Oh, he's breaking. But I always thought that was slightly out of character. I can't imagine number 6 breaking as easily as that. So there was a slight disconnect in maybe the writing and what we know of the character at that point. I'm surprised he was. Oh, you're right. He was clearly kind of at that point kind of starting to go. But I do wonder whether he would have done in reality. I see a couple of people in the chat have answered me when I was talking about whether he was a secret agent or not. And Matthew Pounder says that George Markstein said that number 6 was John Drake. Yes, he did, but Patrick McGoohan said he wasn't. So it's all up in the air again, isn't it?
And one thing that I read in my research was that Patrick McGoohan had vouchsafed to a couple of extras or crew that the character was John Drake.
He told me that too.
Oh, he did?
Not in that many words, but...
Do you remember how he put it?
That it was. Yeah, I came right out and asked him about that, and he answered with something like, yeah. He kind of asked me the same question back to me, but he kind of nodded and smiled like, yes, of course it was him.
And ladies and gentlemen, welcome Captain Cockney Spock.
Good afternoon.
What sort of time do you call this, Captain?
I don't even know. I'm still waking up. do apologise.
And
Really,
I would
most
like to take
unprofessional.
this opportunity to once again share the screen for the merchandise for I Am Not a Number. I am plugging as much of this as possible. Everything that you're going to see here is minimal profit. It's just to help raise awareness for the show. But of course, there's this mug here. And wonderful t-shirts. We have lots of swag. So please visit gillstore.com and help us raise
You're going to do
awareness
that today, Gil.
for the show. Yeah, that would be great.
You get
And
a
of
shirt and a
course-
mug. My wife's a addicted coffee drinker, so I'll get her a mug.
Yeah, I collect coffee cups too.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we do want people to visit Rick's website, which is just
Nice.
such a great fount of everything from Secret Agent to what's going on with the tours of Port Marion and everything in the prisoner. And he's not just hawking his own book. He's got all kinds of other books that you can check out. So definitely visit theunmutual.co.uk.
Thank you. Bless you for the plug. Bless you. Bless you. Bless you.
And of course, I'm so happy that I got my copy of Rick's book, the Essential Guide. And Rick, I think you told me this before, that this is the book that they sell at Port Marion for people that are interested in the history of the prisoner.
That's
right?
right. It's kind of I would call it a starter book if you've seen the show but maybe aren't aware of every production detail in the series. It's kind of an introductory book just to explain the basics: who McGoohan was, how the series came around, how Rover worked, why it was Port Marion, what the car was, all the kind of basic bits of trivia. It explains how they all came about. And yeah, it's the one that when you go to Port Marion, when you go to the village, and that's what they try and sell you as the guide to the series. There are big, thick books out there that really go into the detail of everything. And
Yeah.
and
As a matter
one
of
day
fact-
there will be one of those by me. But for the moment, that's the one I've done so far.
What did I do with
Can't wait to read that.
Oh well, bless you, Tracy.
Yeah,
Thank you.
it's a
I've
really
got a
cool
copy sent to you,
book.
my friend.
I don't know if you know
Thank you.
this, Rick, but when I got the book, it says sample pages enclosed of, quote, walking guide to Port Marion's prisoner sites, close quote. The all-time best-selling prisoner book available from www.pnz.biz, along with many other unique prisoner and McGoohan items. And then it has a couple of
catalog.
and I was like, hey, this isn't Rick's stuff. What's the deal? But it's kind of cool. They have a page here, the Kaleidoscopic Village, and also a map. I'll go ahead and make myself big here. And also a map of your beautiful village.
That is a map of Port Marion as it actually is.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it says it's much smaller than it looks in the series.
It is in the series. It makes it look like it's kind of a town where you need to get the taxi from one side to the other, but it takes about 1 minute to walk from one side of Port Marion to the other. It's an amazing place.
And I was really interested to read in your book about how Port Marion was built, the man that built it, that he had to stop in between, World War II and then get back to it later. There's so much interesting stuff in your book, and I really have only skimmed it. So please, everybody, do buy a copy of Rick Davies' book, The Prisoner, The Essential Guide. It's a great book, and it's only 3 pounds. So get yourself a copy.
Great.
Very cool. Like that. And everybody buy a mug. You can drink your coffee while reading the book. How about that for dual promotion there?
So now I'm going to put Captain Cockney Spock on the spot. How did your watch of The Schizoid Man go, and what thoughts do you have to bring to us?
It's the gift that keeps on giving, because it makes you think. So is it deliberate that 6's double is called number 12?
No, because 12 is double 6.
Exactly.
6 of 2.
So there you go. And beyond that, one of my favourite tropes is when you've got you don't know who's who. You've got 2 people, but it could be basically. So I like the idea, but you'll have to bear with me. I'm still waking up. I'm still getting my coffee on at the moment. But at the same time, I guess for me, a lack of suspension of disbelief, because it's been done in other shows. Only Fools and Horses springs to mind, which is admittedly a comedy. But when you've got 2 people that just look identical, I wouldn't buy that, basically. But it's fiction, so it's fine. But was 12 supposed to have reconstructive surgery? Is he a long lost twin? Is he a clone? Is he a replicant? How did they exactly?
Well, it says specifically that he isn't a clone. Michael Beacom in the chat says, at Cardinal Sin, how do we know this is the real Captain Cockney Spock?
Indeed. Maybe I am a replicant. That is
Matthew Pounder says, does Captain Spock dream of electric rovers?
Yes, they haunt my dreams.
And Carol's Cookies, of course, says, Captain Deckard Spock needs a biscuit to wake up.
Something like that. Definitely a nice strong coffee.
I'm glad that you mentioned clones, Captain, because the clones do feature in the series a lot. They're featured in Arrival. You've got the gardener and the electrician are obviously clones of each other or twins. In Free for All, you've got the paper seller and the cameraman, who are both twins or possibly clones. So it does spring to mind that another episode comes along where there is someone who is identical to another character.
That's the genius of The Prisoner, because it's inference. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, of course, but they never say specifically, in canon or through commentary, that they are specifically clones. It's a possibility, an implication, or is it's not actually set in stone?
And Ivan Ivanovich mentioned something which I actually remember. There's an episode of Danger Man which begins with the claim that somewhere in the world everyone has at least one double. It's the old doppelganger routine,
Well, it happened to me, actually. So, yes, everyone, I met my double, and it was rather uncanny. But this is the whole thing. It's that final line of suspension of disbelief. You can have people that look very, very similar, but not people that will look like actual twins. And therefore, from a logical perspective, he could only be a clone. But this is the fascinating thing, because, this is where we go, are we just splitting hairs, or are the terms meaningful? Because it's not that different from, is 6 a replicant? Because replicants and clones, this is where we get into the importance of terms and so forth. Obviously, The Prisoner isn't Blade Runner. I only wish it was so close. But it is. It's basically, if he is a clone, it's a very different idea to have a clone, some kind of replication of DNA, as opposed to a completely separate person that just happens to have identical facial features, apart from the moustache.
Well, remember in the original series of Kung Fu, of Star Trek, how they would surgically make some of the away team look like Romulans or whatever. And of course, this continued in the Next Generation quite a bit. One of the things that I got out of this episode was there's a power in the collective, but no matter how strictly it's enforced, no matter what the rationale, it can't undermine the reality of individual experiences. One can draw broad conclusions based on certain groupings, but ultimately what we experience on our own terms shapes how we perceive society. And indeed, once he deciphers the extent of the game, he proceeds to make his next big gamble, escape. And what ensues is probably his most daring gamble. He goes to 12's house and forces him, first by displaying himself as a breaking man ready to reveal his own reason for resignation, all before attacking him to disclose both his name and the password for access to 2. And they are Curtis and the Schizoid Man. Also, he sits back as Rover consumes a terrified Curtis, who lets loose the password on 2 occasions before being absorbed, and it appears killed by the absorption. All while 6 looks briefly disturbed, but quickly assumes Curtis's identity. So there are 2 things here. One, this is probably 6 at among his most morally questionable. I mean, few would mistake him for a particularly warm fellow based on his actions in prior episodes, but his slight dismissal of Curtis's death really underscores his more anti-heroic attitudes. Not that he's evil or villainous, but for a man who carries with him the banner of trying to bring down the village, it does serve to indicate that this is somewhat less philosophical and more personal for him. Not that there are absolutes on either side, though. I think that ultimately it's self-serving, and in the end, that's all that matters to 6. And that said, being an agent in the British Civil Service meant he probably saw a lot of horrifying goings-on, to the point where getting killed by Rover was relatively minor in terms of the psychological trauma. Also, Curtis appeared relatively undisturbed by the fact that he and 6 swapped identities, so maybe 6 was just focused on returning the favor. Thoughts?
Yeah, but I think you're right about the experiences he may have had in the past have kind of shaped the person that he is. And I don't want to give anything away, of course, but in the penultimate episode, Once Upon a Time, he and number 2 have a conversation about why he resigned. And he you know, I'm sure it's fine to say this. One of the things he says is for peace of mind. So he must have been experiencing so many things in his past to shape who he was at this point. One piece of trivia, I'm sure you all know this already, but some listeners might not. This is the only episode in which Rover is known by is stated by
his name.
The only time
And 6 says his name.
Yeah, it's the only time the name Rover is spoken in the whole series is in this episode. Never spoken of again, and wasn't spoken about before. So
and by the way, Rick, I wanted to ask you about this. Ivan Ivanovich says in the chat, by the way, the name of that Danger Man episode is The Prisoner.
It is.
Is that true?
That is true. The doppelganger episode of the half-hour episodes of Danger Man is called The Prisoner. It bears no relation to the Prisoner TV series at all. Just shipped that title. But it is about finding a doppelganger for, I think, a professor of some sort, possibly. I can't quite remember. Schmitz rings a bell. I have seen the episode, obviously.
It's a doppelganger of a script.
Yeah, there's no relation to The Prisoner otherwise, other than its title. And interestingly, it was in a stage play called The Prisoner in 1961, which was made into a film with Alec Guinness. So it was the 3rd time that Patrick McGoohan did something called The Prisoner. Funnily enough, none of them had a relationship to each other. And the most prisoner-esque Danger Man episode, or Secret Agent as it was in the States, was an episode called Colony 3. Which I'm sure some of you have seen.
Yes, I mentioned that in the very first episode, that I think that was the prototypical episode for The Prisoner.
Yeah. Tracy, if you haven't seen that, basically what happens is John Drake and some other secret agents find themselves in a village for spies where there is no escape. So it's very kind of...
that's very similar.
And the Soviet spies are there to learn not only English language, but English slang and how to make tea in England and all this kind of thing.
You've got to do the tea properly.
Yeah.
I'm
Going back to this identity thing, because I mean, it's a bit of an obsession with me. Some of you might know with James Bond. The issue with James Bond, and Cardinal and I have been discussing this, is that you've got 5 actors playing one character, James Bond, and a lot of people are like, "Yep, it's not an issue; it's just fiction." And a lot of other people are like, "Yeah, it's definitely an issue. That's 5 different people. I'm instigating a headcanon." So I just realised The Prisoner's got the opposite problem, where you've got 2 different people with an identical face played by one actor. So it's the opposite of James Bond.
And quickly in the chat, Darius Munchausen says, maybe that's why Iron Maiden named an album Peace of Mind. They were fans of The Prisoner. They absolutely are fans of The Prisoner. And Michael Beacom says, thanks for the Amazon link. Rick's book is on its way to me. Not till November, though. So you have a customer already.
I've made a sale. Tonight we eat.
That's right. Tonight we eat.
That is life on the edge.
I'm living the dream, Captain. Living the dream.
That's right. We're living the dream. Living the dream. Let's see. I have some closing notes. For a show famous for keeping the names of its recurring characters obscured, there is a fascinating use of proper names in this episode. We have Curtis as the tragic number 12, Allison as number 24, who is apparently telepathic and shares a connection with 6. And for the first and maybe only time in the series, we have the name for Rover given by 6 himself, which we were just talking about. None of the other characters get their names revealed, however, and maybe that says something about how those of consequence can be faceless drones or be turned into blank drones, while those with real aspirations who let their own personality shine through are damned, tossed aside to the wolves.
Do you guys think that it's implied that 6 and 12 have some kind of a connection beyond just friendship or psychic connection? Because I'm wondering, we've all heard the story that McGoohan had turned down James Bond because he didn't want to have to kiss a woman on screen.
Or use a gun.
Yeah, in the Danger Man series and also in The Prisoner, does the John Drake, quote-unquote, character ever have romantic entanglements with anybody?
Never. The whole. No. Danger Man was originally going to be a James Bond TV series. Ian Fleming worked on the original prototype idea for the Danger Man.
And thank goodness, because then we got the movies and The Prisoner.
Exactly. In the end, Fleming went off to Eon
and Danger Man.
And the series that ITC went forward, it was originally going to be called Lone Wolf. They cast Patrick McGoohan. Patrick McGoohan looked at the scripts and thought, "This is James Bond. I'm not shooting people. I'm not womanizing. This is not the sort of moral character I want." So John Drake, Danger Man, secret agent.
This is not my beautiful house. This is not my beautiful wife.
Secret agent was the spy with no guns and no girls. So at no point in that. And there was one script which was written, I think, by Ian Stewart Black, where McGoohan was supposed to be on a bed looking in a safe, and he was supposed to lean over a woman to get to the safe. And even that, McGoohan said, "Well, I'm not doing that."
Wow.
That's literally more Catholic than the Pope.
Yeah. At no point is inferred in any Danger Man episode that anything is going on. And the same is true of The Prisoner. I think the only time you get it is in Chimes of Big Ben with Nadia, where there's kind of a bit of hugging and hair twirling, but that's only for the benefit of the
story.
Yes, exactly. He's trying to make the villains think that he's falling in love or whatever. And of course, later on in the episodes, it turns out that number 6 is engaged. But again, we only see some goings on between number 6 and his fiance because number 6 is in a different actor's body at that point. So that's the only time.
But you don't think that 6 and 12 had anything going on at all?
No, not at all.
I don't at all.
No. I don't think that's even implied, to be honest.
And I do want to hit a couple quick things in the chat. The Time Prophet says, we are all faceless drones in our jobs. Lawrence Martin says, as a kid, that big white balloon scared me a lot. I never understood what it was, only that it was bad.
Just to follow on, Tracy might not know. Sorry to interrupt, Cardinal. Tracy, I'm sure we'll find this very interesting. I'm sure you will as well. The original script for The Schizoid Man by Terence Feely, the payoff at the end was that Alison would be able to tell the difference between the two number sixes by kissing them both. So the original info was that she and number six had something going on. But guess what? McGoohan read the script and said, "No, you can take that."
He said, no way. And actually, I think the script was better for that.
Yeah, definitely. It was a very kind of...
and this was all a Catholic thing for McGoohan?
Not necessarily a Catholic thing. There are things that he's been in where he does. There's a film where he practically rapes a woman. And there's other TV shows where he does kiss people on screen. I think part of it's Catholic, but he always felt, and he said this in interviews, when I'm on screen on television, I'm a guest in someone's home, and therefore I should behave as such. So he thought that wanton violence, being overly sexual, just was not morally right. He was happily married. He didn't want to put that in jeopardy.
He loved his wife very much.
Yeah. So he was.
How long did his marriage last?
They were married until the day he died. They got married in the 50s.
Really?
They were still married. Joan is still with us. She's still alive. She lives in California. They were still married in 2009 when he passed away. So
do you know how long they were married?
Well, did they get married in 1950 something?
Oh, okay. So it was very long. Yeah.
So they were married for 50, 55 years or something.
And Michael Beacom from the chat says, I had been reading sci-fi since I was very little, so when I saw Rover, I immediately thought it was some kind of bio-robot, very scary, indestructible, inexorable. That's an interesting observation.
I'm sorry to say,
one of these days,
I'm afraid I'm going to have to leave you, gentlemen. I'm afraid I have another call. Would you believe? This time work related that I've got to jump on. So I'm just
That's right.
If you don't mind, I'm going to leave the three of you to carry on without me, and hopefully we can resume next week, possibly, or the week after, if you're all there. And I'd love to join you all.
You're welcome every Wednesday, Rick.
And I definitely look forward to reading your book, Rick.
Oh, you're very kind. I will say if Cardinal could arrange an address, I can get one sent to you. That's not a problem at all.
Oh, that's very sweet of you. Thank you.
I'll get that done straight away. But
nice meeting you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you to everyone in the chat, and thank you to the three of you. And I look forward to next time. Thank you for having me, Cardinal.
And thanks for being here.
Tracy, it's been a genuine honor to meet you. Thank you.
Be seeing you.
Thank you so much. You too.
Yeah, be seeing you.
Bye-bye.
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 Gil, what's the next episode, by the way?
The next episode in our viewing order is The General, I believe.
The General, okay.
Let me double check that.
Yes, The General, confirmed.
Okay.
The General.
Yeah.
I don't remember that one at all by the title, so look forward to seeing that.
And Tracy, aren't these just amazing, remasters into a show that looks like it could have been made yesterday?
That's the first thing that struck me when I started rewatching these.
Aren't they just incredibly
well done? Yeah, absolutely. Very nice to watch again.
And the chat
As Foreigner said, it feels like the first time.
Saying goodbye to Rick. See you next week, sir, and look forward to your book. Be seeing you, Rick. Be seeing you. Night, Rick. Thanks, Rick. And it is wonderful having Rick here. He's a bit modest, but he worked for Network, which was and is the company that did the painstaking remaster, the very tedious work of getting the original film and cleaning it off with a Q-tip or however they do it, and interpolating missing frames and all of that stuff. And it's just for anyone that hasn't seen it, you've got to. Not only is it the best show ever made on television, arguably, but this remaster just incredible. It's beautiful.
It is true. Very true.
So, any closing thoughts, Tracy, Captain?
Yeah, I'm still thinking about the identity. Anyone remember that Peter Sellers film, After the Fox?
After the Fox?
One of several, I think, 4 films where Peter Sellers played more than one role. But in this case, Peter Sellers, it is a comedy, plays the roles of 2 people that happen to have an identical face on 2 hours. And so it's the same idea. In fact, one of them was a prisoner. The other one was the prison doctor. And it's quite a subterfuge. But cut a long story short, at the end, Peter Sellers escapes, except it's a different character. There's a double bluff. You'll have to see the movie. But basically, he breaks the 4th wall at the end. I thought they could have done this at The Prisoner, but it would have been too surreal. He tugs at his fake beard, and then he realizes it's the real beard. He's realizing he's the other character, which breaks the 4th wall. He looks at the camera and goes, "Oh no, the wrong man has escaped." So too whimsical, but that's almost what they could have done with The Prisoner, because then you're left with the feeling, how do we know that's not actually number 12? And
How do we know it's actually Captain Cockney Spock?
And then the question is not who is number 6. The question first is that number 6? And we might actually be asking, who is number 12? Now you've literally got double the questions.
Yep.
That type of thing can go on forever.
Yes,
And
it can.
The Time Prophet in the chat says something interesting. What if number 6 was number 1 all the time, but had a mental breakdown and just wanted to get away from it all, but he couldn't because he was their real leader? That's an interesting idea.
That's kind of what McGoohan implied to me, that 6 was actually number 1.
That we're all the prisoner.
Yeah, and we're trying to escape our own identity in a way. So that's interesting that he wrote that, because that was the feeling I got when I spoke to him. But he might have just been having fun with me a little bit, because, if he was... Go ahead.
Time Prophets. Sorry, Tracy, you go, because there is
That's
already
okay.
an idea, but go on.
No, it's just that he can't really answer that question on, your luckiest day to sit in a room with him and have him say, "Oh, here's who number 1 is." So he was always going to be a bit whimsical about it, but that's kind of what I remember coming away with that day, was the idea that 6 is actually number 1. So anyway,
but interesting, especially if he needs a break. That means that in a way he's a prisoner in his own job. That means that if we're all a prisoner, the one person that shouldn't be a prisoner is the head warder, number 1. If the head warder is such a prisoner in his job that he would rather go on holiday and become a prisoner rather than being a head of the prison, that means he's a bigger prisoner than the actual prisoners. The warder would rather be a prisoner than be a warder. I don't want to be number 1. It's too much pressure. Make me number 6.
That's a good point. I think there's a lot to that.
Done it again.
I will say that I think the Schizoid Man is an episode that benefits from earlier in the viewing order, so as not to make it cliche. And that said, it's still an enjoyable piece, meditating on the concepts of the formation of the individual and the ability to be replaced by a clone, and with some stellar performances from Patrick McGoohan and others. In short, I think it's a good episode, but not great.
Still remains my favorite.
Really? So far, or overall?
My favorite episode. Yeah.
Yeah.
But maybe
that's why you named the Star
it
Trek episode after it.
Yeah, it made such an impact on me when I first saw it. So I've never forgotten it. It's always remained my favorite.
Wow.
But I hear what you're saying. I mean, there's maybe some structural things that are a little weak in it.
Yeah.
For
a little
me,
hard to
it's
believe.
both.
But
For me, I can't reconcile that the two different... Yeah, there are ostensibly 2 different people, and they look not similar, but absolutely identical. Unless, of course, there is another twist about the cloning that we don't know. But, on the other hand, one of my favourite tropes is indeed, who is the main character? Oh no, he's got a double. And then depending on what you're watching, it could be a clone, an identical twin. It could be a parallel universe. It could be so many. It could be time travel. That's the thing. Depending on what genre you're watching, beg your pardon, which genre you're watching. The solution could be, well, quite manifold, basically. But yeah, the general idea of having two people and you don't know which one is the protagonist is a favourite.
Didn't they show 12 getting his hair dyed or something at some point in the episode? So it wasn't.
Nope.
Didn't he have a different hair color slightly? I might be remembering that wrong.
Nope. He was exactly the same as number 6. Except
They didn't dye his hair. Huh?
They let his hair grow longer and they gave him a mustache.
Okay.
Other than that, it was same as it ever was.
Same as it ever was.
And
Okay.
of course, before we go,
Before we become talking heads,
I do want to again plug our new merch store. This is just at gillsstore.com, where you can pick up your I Am Not a Number t-shirt or your I Am Not a Number mug. Lots of cool merch. So give it a look. It's just gillsstore.com. And
remember.
Plenty of stuff besides. And Captain, there's one in the mail for you coming your way.
thank you, sir.
Brilliant. Very welcome.
I need a t-shirt to drink my coffee out of. I mean,
That's right.
Well,
Again,
I
great seeing you
apologise.
guys again.
Yeah, thank you. I apologise for coming in late, but even just in the last 15 minutes, I've picked up so much. It's really quite energising. I've got to say, I might be technically part of it, but Gil, guys, I love this show.
Thanks,
It is a
everybody.
good show.
See you soon.
Yep.
Okay.
And
bye-bye.
So that's Tracy. And for Tracy Tormé and Captain Cockney Spock, it's Cardinal Sin out.